Hello, friends. Christ is risen. He truly is risen. It's my special joy to be with you today with my friend Jonathan Pageau, way up there in the Great White North of Canada. And
It is spring here, we do have spring. It's
I
nice.
I heard you have that for like a week or two,
That's
so
right.
that's great. Yeah. Yes. Welcome from the temperate zone.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, so we're going to talk today about the meaning crisis, which that phrase might be new to a lot of you. For many of you who are used to watching Jonathan and probably a lot of other stuff and people that are connected in Jonathan's circles and circles of circles, you've heard this phrase meaning crisis before, but maybe some of you have not. So we're going to talk about what that is, and particularly about what Christians can, how Christians can respond to it, how Christians can understand it, and be friends to people who are experiencing it in a deep existential way. And right, so that's just kind of the soup that we're going to jump into now. So right, so Christ is risen, Jonathan.
Truly he is risen. It's wonderful to see you, Father. You're my first discussion since Pascha. So
Oh
this is
wow,
perfect. Even I think
wow,
all through Holy Week, like I didn't record anything. So this is
wow,
great. It's a
wow.
perfect
Well,
conversation to start.
you are my first discussion on my YouTube channel.
There you go. That's great. I'm
First one
happy.
is it's not just the talking head of Father Azure. So right. Okay, so the meaning crisis. I mean, you and I are both Orthodox Christians. We're both lifelong Christians. We were both evangelical before we became Orthodox. And I've seen a lot of people talking and listened to a lot of people talking about the meaning crisis. And one of the thoughts that occurred to me was, okay, this is clearly very important, and a lot of people are experiencing this, and I need to think about ways to think about this and talk about this. But I never went through it in a personal existential way. Like there was never any point in my life where I thought to myself, nothing means nothing, you know,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to do? I've never considered suicide. I've never considered, like I've never had that experience. I've certainly had hard times. We've
Hmm.
all had hard times, right? But I've never gone through that. And so that's my kind of in for this. But I think in some level, I think that doesn't super matter for the conversation because the whole culture is going through it. So we're all
Right.
experiencing it on some level or another. So, I mean, could you just talk about your own experience of being in this conversation? Because I've noticed a lot of people that are talking about this, your
Hmm.
name comes up a lot, especially in Orthodox circles.
Well, so the word meaning crisis, it was coined by John Vervaeke, who teaches cognitive psychology at the University of Toronto. And in some ways he's been very good at coining certain experiences that we're having as a culture. And he sticks it with other words, like there are other terms that he talks about. He talks about domicide, the idea of the death of home, or the
Mm.
sense of home. Um,
I can
and
resonate
he
with that as a third culture kid who's lived in 23 homes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
You like understand that sense of homelessness that people have. And so obviously it's a general sense that the West has lost its way in the sense of giving people a place to exist, and giving people a place where they sense that they belong, that they have purpose, that they have reason, that there's a kind of coherence to their worldview as well. So you can understand all of that coming together. John is almost orthodox in the sense that in his view, because he traces it all the way back to nominalism, like a lot of Orthodox like to do. He traces it all the way back to the end of the Middle Ages, the beginning of this process of a kind of break, a disjunct between the world of meaning and the world of our experience, you could say. But in our culture, what we see it especially is, as Christianity deconstructed, we had this secular promise of, if we just give up these religious superstition and we have enough stuff, then we're going to be good to go, and we'll all be rational beings that live in a rational world, and we'll be happy. But the new atheism was like the last push for that type of world. But it turns out that we actually need more than that, that human beings actually need more than just a bunch of stuff and being rational in order to exist. They need to feel connected. They need to feel like they're part of something that's larger than them, that they're pointing towards a purpose that's higher than them. And that's the problem of the meaning crisis. But it manifests itself in all kinds of ways, right? From the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of people feeling nihilistic, people not having purpose in their personal lives, but then also our society's kind of just wandering and looking for purposes to grab onto, and so we're in danger of also ideological capture, and which is why like let's say crazy environmentalism, like over the top environmentalism, or even extreme nationalisms or ethnic identities, or also the LGBT stuff, like all of that stuff is some ways a symptom of people like, I need something to grab onto
Yeah.
that will give me purpose and meaning and direction. So
Yeah.
that's a way of understanding it.
I'm reminded now suddenly of that great saying from G.K. Chesterton, which I can't remember which text it's in now, where he says, and I might be slightly paraphrasing, but he says essentially, when men stop believing in God, they don't then believe in nothing. They believe in anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
so you could say that a lot of the new religious movements are part of that, but it's a way of framing the crisis that has multiple manifestations in a bigger understanding, and that they're all symptoms of the same problem. And so and it is really, I believe, the breakdown of the Enlightenment. That's
Mm.
what it is that the promise of the Enlightenment just didn't deliver.
It's so strange to feel. I mean, the Enlightenment, that's centuries ago now.
Yeah, yeah.
And to feel like we're at the end of that. You
Well, you
know,
can see it. I mean, it's shaking. It's really shaking very strongly right now in the world of public intellectuals. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was one of the New Atheists' flagship, person to wave because she was a woman. She was Somali. She renounced her faith in the name of atheism. She's recently converted to Christianity, and it's just shaking things up. And you see all these characters that were once aggressively anti-religious, like Douglas Murray, or just different public intellectuals, are now either more tacit about their anti-religious views, like they're just not as aggressive, or they're ultimately actually saying, like Richard Dawkins recently said, I'm a cultural Christian, which is like, okay, Mr. Dawkins, thank you. Thank you for attacking and undermining everything, and then realizing that, oh, I need to hang on to a little bit of this, because or else I'm in trouble of falling into
yeah.
absolute chaos and madness.
Yeah, a number of the people that you just mentioned, and the kind of the story arc that you're describing, I just want to recommend to people, and I've recommended this to people already several times now, but I just want to recommend again. There's an amazing new podcast, and I know you interviewed the host, Justin Brierley. Amazing new podcast series called "The Surprising Rebirth of the Belief in God," which is this
Yeah.
long, clunky title. But anyway, it does what it says on the label. It's about the surprising rebirth of belief in God. But he starts out talking about the rise and fall of the new atheism.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
remember what was this, about 12, 15 years ago now, when new atheism was all the rage and it just looked triumphant.
Yeah.
You know, the sense of like, people who believe in Christ are just stupid and need to be shouted down and ridiculed, and like that's the approach to take. And how especially a lot of Christians felt like that's the way the culture is going now. And is persecution just around the corner? Is martyrdom just around the corner? I mean, you can still hear people talk that way, um, but it's fascinating to watch how the new atheism has kind of fragmented. It's really what happened. It
Yeah,
fragmented, I think.
because it was like, first of all, it wasn't sufficient, and second of all,
Right.
because human beings need something mysterious to hold them together. They actually don't function only by reason, and therefore many of the new atheists gave themselves to the woke culture and then started saying crazy things. Like they would argue against Christians. Christians say this is the body and blood of Christ. How ridiculous! But to say a man is a woman, like, oh no, that's completely reasonable. Like that's a complete. It's just a. It's like
Right.
a woman can have male reproductive organs or female reproductive organs.
It's
Like,
it's
what's the problem? Why are
it's
you why are you
it's
so shocked that this is a rational thing to say?
it's the
It's
new
just hilarious.
transubstantiation.
Exactly.
It's
It's
so weird.
absolutely
Yeah, I mean
hilarious.
that is literally what transgender ideology is saying is that the
Yeah.
substance of a person is different from their accidents,
Yeah.
you know?
So
Uh,
so it's really, I mean, and Jordan Peterson, to be honest, has played a really strong, important role in this because he he went right when he started. He knew. I remember the first times I talked to him, he was like, "I want to talk to Sam Harris. I want to talk to Richard Dawkins." Those are the people he wanted to talk to right at the outset because he knew that he had a way of talking about things that would make the new atheist argument evaporate, at some point. Like it would take a little while to scratch at it. But so he's not obviously not the only person. Like people like Tom Holland, they're different like historians, for example, showing
yeah.
Tom Holland's book, Dominion, is amazing because he really demonstrates that if you think that the ancient pagan world was this just rational, amazing place, just because you like Plato and Aristotle, it's like, no, that's not what the pagan world was. The Roman world was a world of domination and a world of inhuman other. Like the slaves were just, you could do whatever you wanted. Like there
Yeah.
was no law to protect them.
Yeah. I mean, in the Roman Empire, if you were not a citizen, you had the legal definition of non persona.
Yeah.
Like literally, your legal definition is you're not a person.
And
Um,
so,
yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say, another phrase I loved from the Justin Brierley podcast is being Tom Holland pilled,
yeah,
which is this idea that once you look deep into history and you realize what paganism was really like, what the pre-Christian world was really, really like,
yeah,
uh, you see that everything that we kind of value about humanity and human rights and the idea that women are persons, that
yeah,
children are persons, that
yeah,
consent is even a thing,
yeah.
that all of this comes from Christianity. And so the question is, well, how do you get to have all of that and not its source? Do
Exactly.
you? Can you? And I
No.
think I think one of the effects, like this is what I want to talk about for a second, is the effects of this crisis on our society now. I think one of the effects that we're seeing is as people get away from Christianity and the basic message that God became man and was killed by his creatures and he sacrificed himself. Like that's the key thing in Christianity is the death of God, the martyrdom of God, right? Um, that as you get away from that, then what's happening now is the old pagan values are starting to come back. Sort of the might makes right. Um, that it's okay for me to treat other human beings however I like as long as I can get away with it. And like even the new atheism, right, which was led by all these very sort of frankly posh intellectuals, right? It was interesting to watch as they kind of advanced to start of being in many cases really mean to
Hmm.
other humans. Like it's interesting how the mask, I mean, people say the mask comes off, but I think it's not that the mask has come off. I think that the restraint
Yeah.
of Christ comes off when people cast it off.
Yeah.
And I think that
I mean, they
like
argued against free will a lot. A lot of them still
right,
today. Sam Harris argues against free will. It's like let's ride that argument till the end. It's like you don't believe in free will, that you continue to think that you shouldn't force people to do things, that you shouldn't force people, but
right,
you don't believe in free will. It's like where then does your argument for freedom of association, freedom of all these freedoms
right,
that you love, where did they come from if there's no
right.
free
I
will?
mean, an argument against free will does serve someone, and it serves the people in power.
That's right.
That's who it serves. So
Yeah.
if you're going to argue against free will, then you are arguing for totalitarianism. You are arguing for authoritarianism ultimately.
Yeah.
I think I mean, I know probably I'll attract a few unhappy Calvinists, but I think it's notable that Calvin's Geneva was not a great place to live. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was pretty extreme, with a lot of controlling behavior, like everything was about what makes you worthy or unworthy to be able to have communion. There are actually tokens. You had to have a token to go have communion,
Hmm.
you know, social capital, as it were. Right. It's interesting how these things repeat themselves when you argue against free will that serves the powerful,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
definitely, definitely.
Free will in the Christian sense, which is not just like I can do whatever I want or say whatever I want, but is I have the freedom to grow to be, as Christ puts it, equals to the angels,
Yeah. Yeah.
that elevates all of mankind and makes us all better to each other. That's not the purpose of it, but it does do that. You
Well,
know?
one of the things though that's amazing about the, let's say, the moment that we're in terms of the meaning crisis is that I think that, there are multiple causalities, and in some ways we're in, let's say, we're following patterns that are bigger than us. Like it's not just about this or that person doing this or that or believing this or that or Jordan Peterson or Richard Dawkins or anything.
Yeah.
It seems like, in some ways there was a veil pulled over people's eyes for a few centuries, where it was, for many people, it was impossible for them to perceive the meaning and the deep meaning and the deep realities of spiritual existence. Like, and so they could understand it in a kind of, how can I say this, like a mythological way, where they understood the images. Like we talk about angels, but it's like, okay, so these beings that are in the heavens, and some people continue to believe it in that way, like in an almost, I wouldn't say superstitious way, but a very simple, like a simple kind of believer's way, which is fine for a lot of
Yeah.
people. But the intellectuals stopped knowing what these things were about, and it's like, okay, so so God comes to the earth, and then he walks and then he dies, and then I'm going to heaven. Like, what are these causal, like, this is a crazy thing.
Yeah.
But what's happening, I think, is that in some ways there's something in the culture, there's something happening in general, which is breaking apart this veil, like opening the veil, and so that people are now able to perceive what it means for there to be agencies beyond human agency, what it means on us, like what it looks like for agency to act on humans, what it means for someone to be ridden by a demon or to be affected by these spiritual powers that influence us, right? uh and I think, and you can see it breaking, like even with C.S. Lewis, you can kind of see it happening in the 50s. It's already kind of, there are little cracks, but now it's like opened up. But it's
Yeah.
dangerous because most people are not going to go Christian. Most people are going to go weird, you know, stuff, like, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have access to this, so let's take psychedelics. I have access to this, so let's try to have mystical visions of whatever, like completely without any discernment.
Yeah.
And so it's, we're looking down a dark path, mostly, I would say.
I think so. And it's fascinating. I mean, I have a few things to say. Number one is I think that a lot of people don't realize how much we are subject to the thoughts of philosophers who have been dead for a century or two. How much they affect culture, how much we think their thoughts without even knowing that they've been passed on to us from them,
Hmm.
which is a normal human thing, right? But when the thought is not Christ anymore, it becomes other things. Um, but also, yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who've discovered, as you said, like they take psychedelics or they get into the occult or Wicca, and they discover this stuff is real, right? They discover like this is real. A thing happens when I do this, and that can be very intoxicating.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a sense of like this is real, and I've been told all my life it wasn't real, and wow, it's real. But it's like, okay, yes, it's real, but it may not be good.
That's
It may not have your best interests at heart. Yes, you're talking to a spirit. What is that spirit? I mean, it's suddenly all of these things in the scriptures about test the spirits. Wow, how
yeah, it becomes
applicable
pretty
is that old stuff? It's so
that's
applicable. Uh yeah, I think there's like I like to talk about enchantment a lot, which is an interesting word. I like, I mean, words don't always mean what they etymologically suggest they mean, but I like
Mhm.
to still push them in that direction anyway. And I think that's because there's a little J.R. Tolkien inside me saying, do it, you want to do it. So like enchantment, right? It means to sing into something, literally singing in and chant, which is probably a little bit more obvious for you in French, because
Yeah.
chanter is just sing, right? Um, but that there's a sense of this sort of ritual action that a person takes that then defines the story that they're in and
Hmm.
tells them how to live in that story and affects them. But there's dark enchantment,
Oh yeah.
right? like there's evil spirits. Um, and I mean, no matter how someone wants to conceive of them, if they, they could conceive them in the classic sense of some like sort of like a dark looking angel with bat wings or whatever, as a demon, or you can say, vast cosmic intelligence that is coming on us from the top and is leading a whole society with a spirit. Like, I mean, however you want to conceive of it, there's a reality that we are, and I think this is where, I mean, I'm not deeply read in philosophy because that was just never my thing, but I know about the sense of the naked Cartesian soul, this idea of, as Taylor calls it, the buffered self, right? Like that's the way we think of ourselves. And then
Hmm.
we discover, wait a minute, I'm actually permeable.
Oh yeah.
And um, that's dangerous and exciting and interesting. And I don't know, talk about that a little bit. Like, what does it mean to be permeable beings in the midst of a crisis of meaning? Or like, Charles Taylor, I want to talk about this question of the age of authenticity that he describes
Yeah.
too in his stuff. Like it seems like everyone's heading for try to be as authentic as possible. What's the saying? You do you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Isn't that all about like whatever it is you are, just go ahead and be that. Um, but nobody
Yeah, but
seems to
they
know who they are.
it's not a, yeah, it's not a real authenticity. It's a, because we live in a, it's almost like an inverted authenticity, because the you do you is actually usually means something like whatever whim you have, you act on that whim. It's like that's not you. You're not your
Yeah.
whim, you're not your desires, you're not your thoughts. And that's what traditional, not just orthodoxy, but almost every single traditional religion will tell you that. It's like, you're not that feeling, you're not your thought, that you are, there's something behind that. There's intelligence, like that would be the word that we use in the West, or the nous, or there's something behind which is beyond all this noise, you could say. It's not that the noise doesn't participate in you, it is a manifestation of you, but it's not, you're not that. And uh so we have this problem right now, which is that people are looking for spirituality, but they confuse all the levels. It's like we've just lost the wisdom. And so they confuse like some experience or some feeling or whatever. I mean, we've been misled for so long, even all these German theologians who talked about religious feeling, like as if that's what religion is about. And so we're kind of messed up, because so it's like the veil is being torn, or the veil is being opened up again, and all of a sudden people are able to see or to participate in these spiritual influences, but we've lost the normal hierarchy that the ancient world used to be based on. And so no, people don't know how to differentiate a demon from an angel. They don't know how to differentiate something which can still cause a kind of ecstasy, like you can fall into a trance if you go to a rave, like, and you can kind of enter into a spirit and then completely lose yourself in a rave. But that's not the equivalent of taking communion. It's not the equivalent of doing the Jesus prayer, although both can lead to types of ecstatic of ecstasies. And so anyways, so this is the issue that we
Yeah.
have. And as we one of the things that's making us see, I think, is also the political radicalization is making us see the spirits, like, because we can see it in others more easily. You
Yeah.
can notice someone, right? You all of a sudden someone talks to you and you're like, oh, Matthew just disappeared. Now I'm talking to like some political agency that is running through them. They've lost and they're just running a program. And it's like, huh, interesting. And then you realize, oh, well, actually, I probably have some of those. And then you start to see them appear in the world, like these programs that are running, like these kids that are becoming, furries or whatever, like become thinking they're animals and stuff. It's like you watch it and it's like, oh, there's this spirit that's just running through society and influencing people into all kinds of weird behaviors that are completely irrational and weird. And so we can actually see it because of the breakdown.
Yeah. I think that like, and thinking about that phrase, you do you, right? Like, what does that mean? That means construct your own story,
Yeah.
construct your own definition of who you are, and then live that. But I think that what happens is when people try to do that, they discover that they're not actually as good a storyteller as they thought they were.
Yeah. But
and
they don't realize they're slaves. They end up being slaves to some
right,
stupid thing.
right,
It's like
right.
who is the, think about like our, like when we were younger, like our version of you do you. It's like you're a grunge punk type person. And then
Sure,
you have
yeah,
a uniform. Then you I can see you from a mile away. It's like you're goth, or you're super, like you're really marginal and original. It's like, why are you wearing a uniform then? And so
yes,
you see the same thing now. Like people like are like, oh, I just be myself, and then they become like a, you're like, oh, I can see you, like you're such, you've been completely taken over by a spirit.
yeah. There was I remember there was a I can't remember which band it was now. I think they were in the 90s, and they had this phrase, I want to be different, just like all the different people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the thing is like when a people attempt to authentically construct their own identity and be themselves, they end up being anything but themselves.
That's right.
There's some other thing. And and so there's this I don't know, it's a fragment. And so the problem is, as you use the word whim, right? The problem is my whims today and my whims tomorrow are related to each other, but they're going to be different tomorrow. I'm going to feel differently about who I am and what my life is tomorrow than I do today. I'm going to feel differently about it tonight.
Yeah.
When I'm tired and at the end of my rope, I'm going to start thinking about my life, my relationships and whatever in a different light than I think about them when I've just had a cup of coffee and I'm feeling pretty good. And so then the problem is that when you have no kind of story that we're all part of, then I tend to believe whatever goes through my head. One thing I often say to people in confession is I'll say, look, don't believe everything you think.
That's right.
And I like that because it's very short and memorable. Don't believe everything you think. I mean, and this is just simply like what a lot of especially some of our modern fathers in the Orthodox Church will say is like, look, thoughts are thoughts. They're not you.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
let them flow through you, you don't have to hitch your wagon to every thought that comes along.
Yeah. And what happens with the, and this is the kind of the reverse of it, is that if you become like that, like fluid, right? That's a word people like to use a lot, like the idea of being a fluid personality, fluid identity, fluid gender, all this stuff. You actually become potential for a spirit. You actually become potential. You become
Yeah.
food for an ideology, food for something that's running through society, food for or an addiction, anything that is kind of above, because that's the, in some ways it's like it's actually a process, right? When Saint John the Foreigner says, make way, like clear everything, make way for the Lord. The Lord has to come, right? If you do that when you're baptized. But imagine if you're baptized into fluidity, but then you don't receive the Holy Spirit when you come out. It's like, oh, so now you're nothing. So you're basically body for something. You're the body.
Yeah.
You're being ready to be dominated by some spirit. And so this is in some ways the flip side of becoming fluid, is that you're actually opening yourself up to possession, like not necessarily possession in the classical sense of some demon possessing you, but being possessed by some spirit that will run you, whether it's a political ideology, whether it's a some social cause that will kind of basically
Yeah.
take you over, or whatever it could be.
Yeah. I mean, this strikes me as a kind of a manifestation of Antichrist, right? Because I mean, part of what it means to be Christian is to be broken, right? Whatever it is that I think I am or have been living, when there's a call to repentance, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent is about, as David puts it, right? A broken and a contrite heart. So there's a brokenness that needs to happen. There's an unforming that needs to happen, a breaking down, a deconstruction, right? And yet, um, for the I think about the words of Saint Ignatius of Antioch, where he says, "I am the wheat of God."
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to be ground by the teeth of the wild beasts that are going to martyr him in Rome. And he says, so that I may become the pure bread of God.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that his telos is the Eucharist, that in a mystical sense, he becomes the Eucharist, right? Through his martyrdom, through his being a bishop, through his death and his resurrection, because he knows that's why he wants to be martyred, which is it's such a scandalous thing. If you read, like, especially his epistles to the Romans, St. Ignatius' epistles to the Romans, he says, now none of you get in the way of my martyrdom. Like, don't
Yeah,
intercede with the authorities. Don't prevent this. This is my life. This is what I'm going to go do. It seems weird, you
yeah, it's
know?
a little, yeah, it's hard for us to understand that for sure.
But it's that sense of I need to go through the wheat grinder so that I can become, so that I can become. And I think that that's one of the problems of this sense of fluidity is it's okay, be ground up, sure. That's Christianity. And this is why I think it's antichrist, is because it's be ground up, but not to become the pure bread of God, but rather to become the food for demons,
Yeah, yeah.
to be eaten, swallowed by something else. I mean,
Well,
this
that's
is
what
the,
the image that Christ used about cleaning the house. Like that's exactly what Christ is
yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
you,
Well,
if you break something down, you have to fill it with something else, or else it
that's right.
becomes food for something.
That's
Like
right.
it's broken. It's going to become potential for something
Right.
else.
And I mean, and that's the image of the serpent from Genesis 3, right? That he eats dust. And what's dust? Well, that's dead humans, because humans came from dust and they're heading back to dust now because of sin. Um, there's always something that's going to eat you, right? Or eat at you. I think it's funny. If I had to describe our cultural moment, I would say that we're being eaten at,
Yeah,
we're being gnawed on, chewed up,
yeah.
you know? Um, yeah. And one of the thoughts that came to me, and maybe we can work this out, because this is just a thought that came, but I need some shape for it, is I think that the response to this is that gospel that we just heard at Pascha, right? Where it says, where St. John says, the word becomes flesh and he dwelt among us. He beheld his glory, the glory is of the only Son of the Father. Um, I feel like that's the key, but I want to work through this a little bit, right? So I know that the question of story is big in all of this, right? We've lost our societal story, which for the West is basically a Christian story.
Yeah.
It's, even though we've been fragmented in the West for centuries upon centuries into different kinds of Christianity, there is still kind of a basic Christianity, a sort of small O Orthodox Christianity that sort of held it all together. Trinitarianism, traditional Christology,
Mhm.
this basic sense that we need to worship God. Not that I'm saying the rest of the rest doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. I mean, I
Yeah.
have a 400 plus page book talking about why it all matters. But nonetheless, that was the common story that sort of held everything together, and that's broken up and slipped away. And so then humans are looking for stories. So then the question is, how can we know which story is the right one? I mean, we've already talked about how people are just grabbing onto every story.
Yeah. Well, I think that well, first of all, this is really what you're saying is very important. Like for people who haven't thought it through, it's extremely important. And what you're saying about the logos becoming flesh in some ways is showing itself in the meaning crisis to be the solution to this problem. Like whether it's a Christian one or not, it's in the sense that purposes precede phenomena. Like people are notice are becoming to that conclusion that in order to be able to even perceive phenomena, you see it pointing towards the reason why you're seeing it. And that's really like St. Maximus is that's what he talks about. He's not St. Maximus isn't just talking about abstract whatever. He's actually talking about how we engage with reality. This is how we perceive reality. And so we realize that the world is held together by purposes, and that in fact it's not the meaninglessness is impossible, and that
Mm,
nihilism is nihilism. It's like if nihilism were true, you would suffer from it. Like if there was no meaning, it wouldn't make you suffer. The reason why it makes you suffer is because it's actually a perversion of what is true, which is that what's making you suffer in nihilism is meaning. That's what's making you suffer. It's
uh,
like it's because you know that there should be meaning. And so so there is necessarily meaning. Even if it just means like getting up and putting slippers on, like that's a purpose. It's a
yeah.
little purpose, but those purposes are all embedded into each other.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me, like I think about that saying from C.S. Lewis where he says that the fact that there's a desire in him for something beyond this world means that there must be something beyond this world.
I believe that's almost necessary. Like that there's something at least pulling you beyond your proximal desires. Like let's be as nihilistic as we can. Like there's definitely some, even if we don't want to believe yet in God, like there's definitely something pulling you past your proximal desires, because that's the motor that makes you function, or else you would just, I mean, you wouldn't even exist.
Yeah.
And so this is really important. But then the way that we engage with that in our life is story, because it brings facts together, it brings actions together towards purpose. And they're little stories, right? They're little stories like your day, like even this meeting, like there are these little stories, and they all embed themselves in bigger and bigger stories. And you realize that although the little stories are good enough for most, for let's say for your days. But
Yeah.
if they're not embedded in something more, then at some point they start to not be enough. And most
Yeah.
people will feel that if you're
It,
just
it,
grinding,
it
right?
wears on you after a while. Like, where am I going? Where is my life going? Even though like you might look like you've got it all together and every day is a good day, your bank account is getting bigger, everybody's healthy. But what?
Yeah,
Towards what?
yeah, exactly. Like, because pleasure, turns out, it is not, how can I say this? Like, pleasure is a treacherous thing once you start to realize it, because first of all, it diminishes as it increases. That's also something
Yeah.
to realize,
It's
right? It's like,
addictive.
yeah, it's as if the more you have, the less satisfied that you are. And you actually, as you have more, let's say more pleasure, more stuff, or more riches, then you should be afraid of the spot you were before, because the spot you were before didn't make you suffer much. But now if you lose what you had, then the same place you were before will now become, like,
Mm.
suffering to you. So all of these things, I mean, these are the things the saints talk about. Like, St. Augustine talked about that in the City of God. Like, he analyzes this problem of, what is it we're for? Like, what are we doing? And that at some point you realize that these meanings and these stories, they embed themselves, and that the ultimate story is the story of Jesus. Like, it just, because it gives meaning to all the other stories, and it makes you realize that it's actually not in grasping, that it's in letting go, and it's
Mm.
not in taking, that it's in giving, and that it's in giving up, that you are filled up. So this question that you had before of the idea of you do you, what you realize that if you actually want to be you, you should aim at something else than you. You
Mm.
actually have to aim at something more than you. If you give yourself to others, then you will be the best you, and you'll be the most full you that you can be. But if you try to do you and to be you, then you become a slave to something.
I mean, isn't that what Christ said, right? If a man would save his life, he'll lose it. If
Yeah.
he loses his life for my sake in the gospel, he'll save it.
Yeah, he'll find fullness even of himself. And so that is the best story. It's not only the best story, but it's also actually happens to be the story, the motor of reality. It actually ends up being what Christ revealed to us is actually how the world works. And that even that the most powerful, if they do not give back, if the most powerful, they do not give back, and they do not empty themselves into those over who they rule, let's say, then they just are lonely and miserable. That's what happens. But if they give themselves, if your power is given and kind of put to the service of others, then even power itself can be fulfilling, because it's in the service of others.
Yeah. I I think, especially thinking about the fact that there's a number of these public intellectuals now who are either becoming Christian or kind of giving Christianity a second glance, or at least saying, well, I mean, I think this is what Tom Holland says, like, I'm a Christian atheist. Like, I don't believe it personally, but I don't want to live in a world where it's not true or not
Yeah.
believed to be true. Um, I think that there's two thoughts that I had about that. One is, and you just kind of laid this out, that the story of Jesus Christ, God become man, right? So the word becomes flesh and dwells among us, John chapter 1. And not just any God, right? It's funny, people are like, oh, I love it when people say, well, an atheist will say, well, do you believe in all those other thousands of other gods? But you believe in this one? I just believe in one fewer God than you do. I'm like, actually, I believe in all of those
I
gods.
know.
Uh, but I only worship the one.
That's
And part
right.
of the reason I worship him is because he's different from all the rest.
Yeah.
Not just that he's the best. He's not the best God. He is the God above all else. He's not the biggest thing in the universe. He's not even in the universe, right?
Yeah.
That God becomes man, um, and is crucified for our sake. That story is objectively bigger than all other stories.
Yeah.
Whether you think it's true or not, it's objectively bigger than all other stories. But here's the other thought that I had about that is I think a lot of times, especially for those of us who are professional talkers, um, you know, we think, okay, well, how do I talk about this in a way that does the job, that really convinces or whatever, whatever, whatever. And especially if you're a preacher or like an apologist or whatever, like how do I convince other people? How do I get them to do the things that I want them to do? There's often this kind of internalized atheism
Hmm.
that not in the sense of I don't believe in God, but rather I'm doing this without God, which is
Hmm.
what atheism literally means, is to be without God. There's a sense of I can accomplish this, and then on my own. And so I mentioned this as an answer to this question of like, well, what about all the other stories? How do I know that this is the story? How do I know
Hmm.
that? And I think that on a certain level, like, yes, you can point to the fact that this is an objectively greater story than all other stories, but that doesn't actually get people to repent in and of itself,
Hmm.
you know? Um, as one of the interviewees on Justin Brierley's podcast says, the fact that God exists is perhaps the least interesting thing about him. That he exists doesn't bring anybody to repentance. I also say this too, by the way, that the Orthodox Church being being the true church is the least interesting thing about it. Like, like what if you were in the first century and you say we have the true church, and people are like, well, what's a church?
Yeah.
But anyway, here's where I'm going with this, that if God is real and is active and Jesus is who we say he is, then he's engaged in this. He's working on it. He's
Hmm.
telling the story. And it doesn't just fall on my ability to tell a convincing story or to tell the story in the most convincing way. You know,
No, I agree. The story itself is the power. I mean, all we can do is give people reason to look at it, like, maybe help people want to meditate on it, or to, to because there is I think the one thing that we can do, or that, let's say, that I try to do, is that it seems like one of the problems we've had in the past few centuries, in some ways, the story of Jesus has also become veiled,
yeah,
because people are so used to hearing it, and it's kind of become so ubiquitous, and it's just there.
cliche.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, you say, oh, all you need is love, right? That's just such a cliche. But and so to just pique people's curiosity, to look at it afresh, and to look at it again, and to see like what it does, I think that's all we can really do. Because the story itself is the most powerful. And also to get people away from the idea that the story of Jesus just plays like some note in a systematic theological program, where it's like Jesus is just like, oh yeah, God had to send his son down so he could be killed, so then you could be saved. It's like, this weird thing where it's like just
Yeah.
basically a program, or like some mathematical thing that had to happen. But the actual story, like, read this the story of Jesus, and how it recapitulates the Gospels, the Old Testament, and how, he all the things that he fills up, and all the mysteries that he manifests in his story. And also, like, not just the story in the Bible itself, but how it also fills itself up in the liturgical year, and with the resurrection, and the hymns, and all this stuff. Like, I mean, it's become so. I mean, just come to it. Come to a Holy Friday Orthodox service. And just listen to the crazy
Yeah.
things that we say in church about what happened when Jesus was hanging on the cross. I mean, it
Right.
is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the word, the logos doesn't become text, it becomes flesh, right? So it's not, I mean, we do say it's a story, but it's not just a story. Like it's the real it's the real, person here among us. And I think that um I think one of the things that's happened is, well, let me back up a little bit. So a useful definition that I learned um, from my friend Father Stephen DeYoung, which I'm only going to mention him once because if you mention him 3 times, he appears. Uh, that's the ritual of getting him to arrive.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that he passed on to me from ritual theory is the difference between myth and mythology. Right. Myth is a story that people participate in ritually, and so therefore it transforms and defines their life.
Mm.
Mythology is a story that people read after
Hmm.
they've stopped participating in it ritually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like,
Right.
so the way we treat Greek mythology
Exactly.
is that
Yeah.
it's like it's interesting stories that have some insight in them, but they're not our story. Like we don't worship
Right.
Zeus. We
Yeah.
don't go to the temple.
Like Zeus is this goofy, terrible father, blah 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 blah. But for the people who lived it, the people for whom this was their ritual life, Zeus was the most powerful thing in their world. He was a serial rapist. He did not care about you personally, and he was very dangerous. And so you worship him so that he doesn't get you.
He doesn't, so he doesn't hurt you.
Right. That's the way
Yeah,
paganism works,
yeah,
boys and
yeah, yeah,
girls.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You worship the gods so they don't hurt you or that you can get something from them.
yeah.
Right. Which is funny. That's the way a lot of people think about
Even
the Father,
now,
Son, and Holy Spirit, but that's not Christianity.
yeah,
So I think that one of the things in trying to understand where we are and why we have this meaning crisis is I think that as Christianity in the West has become de-ritualized,
hmm.
it didn't become demythologized. It became mythologized. It became demythed.
Hmm.
Um, it we removed the ritual participation in the actual events of Christ's ministry on earth and the acts of his saints and so forth. And I think that's why it became, especially for a certain sector of Protestantism, a very intellectual thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Four bare walls and a sermon. The sermon is the main event. But even frankly, for a lot of Roman Catholicism, the glory of the Latin liturgical tradition has been stripped away for
yeah,
most Catholics. There's a handful that are still living it, and God bless you guys. But so I think what's happened is that there's a disenchantment of the chants of Christ that has occurred, but there's now a reenchantment that's occurred with other kinds of rituals that we participate in. And I think like one of the big ones I think is money.
yeah,
Like what is money? It's the thing that flows through everything and binds everything. It's the new force, right? Like the force that binds us all together. But where is it exactly? Well, we might have a coin or a bill, but that's not the money. We know that that's not the money. That just represents the money.
yeah, yeah,
So it's this spiritual force. Money is a spiritual force. It's a kind of enchantment, and you need it for everything, and it
yeah,
controls things, and it's used for power, and like all of this stuff, right? And so what's happened is that as we disenchanted our Christianity, we reenchanted with other kinds of enchantment. Money is
yeah.
just one example.
Yeah, that's a great example because, like you said, it's basically faith, like because it's a
Yeah,
promise.
it's an
It's a
unseen force.
promise. It's not. It does. It's yeah. The bills actually don't mean
The
anything.
the
Like, well,
full
they mean
faith
something,
and
but
we call it the full here in the U.S. We call it the full faith and credit of the United States. The full faith credit, that's about belief.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
yeah
Uh,
it
I want to
it's
say one thing. I want to say one thing about just the secularists that are kind of coming close to Christianity but don't are willing to go there, and
yeah
it's that at some point, the reason why the story of Christ did what it did, like the reason why the fact of the incarnation or even if you don't believe in the incarnation, let's say you're a secular person, the fact that that story and the fact that the people that transmitted it transformed all the West into what it is that we find good about it today means that because some people will say, can it just be like a useful lie, like it's a useful lie, but the question is it the pattern of reality or not? Like, is it good? Is it the good pattern? Like, if it's the good pattern, why does it bother you that it happened? Like, why are you so surprised and shocked that it's a story that happened and that it laid the foundation for who we are now? Because if you say that the entire Western world is based on a lie, well, you cannot have the fruits of that. Like you will those fruits will start to go away. There's no way around it. So I'm
we're
not
seeing
saying
it.
that you should be utilitarian about it and believe, but you have to understand the situation in which we are, which is that if it's real, like if we do believe that this is the fruits of that, humility, self-sacrifice, love of others, love of neighbor, all of these things that Christ brought us, if we do believe that that's the best way to be, then you can't get around it. Like you have to either embrace it or understand that it will go away without it being the anchor that holds it together. You can't have a world based on a lie. At some point, the reality will start to shine through.
Yeah,
So
because the human person is always reaching towards something, is always trying to worship something. And worshiping an idea can only take you so far.
yeah,
Especially if you say this is just pure social contract. Like we've all evolved our society to the point where we all agree that rape is wrong. But it's not wrong in any absolute sense. It's just we all agree. But no, like you can't even order a society that way. Like if someone says, "Well, I don't agree," then everyone else says, "Well, we have the right to throw you into prison or to kill you because you don't agree." That doesn't, how does that square with
yeah,
sort of classical liberalism, where it's like, no, everyone can just say and believe in whatever they want, like there needs to be something that binds. And
yeah,
if it's binding, then that means it's bigger than all of us. And an idea that we can all just sort of change is not going to be binding in any way. At least it might temporarily be, but a lot of people are going to say, well, why should I agree with that? I'm going to get together with a bunch of my friends, and together we're not going to do that. And we're going to exercise force over you,
yeah,
and I think that sense of the will to power, right? So that Nietzschean nihilistic sense. I think that people who are even the ones who sort of want to accept the fruits of Christianity, but without Christianity, I don't think they realize that that's what's really coming. And and it's been interesting, like to watch uh, a lot of those folks, like right, like Richard Dawkins, for instance, he suffered cancel culture mobs.
yeah,
You know, it's like, well, what do you think you were asking for, Dr. Dawkins? I
yeah,
mean, this is what you said you wanted, right? The idea that there is, like, there's one point where someone engaged him on this question of rape, and he basically said, well, we've evolved to this point, and he says, I don't want to live in a world where we didn't evolve to that point. And the interviewer says, but you don't have a rational basis for that. It's just what you want. And
yeah,
Dawkins, actually, to his credit, he says, that's right. This is just what I want, you know, which is a very stark and kind of dark thing to say on some level, right? Because what if a bunch of other people want something else?
yeah,
What is the basis on which someone will say no or will be martyred for that, or whatever? It has to be something transcendent. And to me, the opposite of the word made flesh is Gnosticism, right? It's all just things that we think. Like when Hamlet says, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. We should all remember that he's pretending to be insane when he says that. Like that's an insane thing to say, Hamlet.
mhm,
That's not, but it's funny how the modern world has taken that as being like an axiom. And it's all
yeah,
just arbitrary. Um, but that Gnosticism eventually does deteriorate into, like, you can have a group of sort of enlightened elite who are Gnostics, right? And that's lovely. We think our big thoughts and have our whatever. But when that takes over a culture, then it works out very differently and
yeah,
in a dark, dark way. Um, okay, so the place that I wanted to kind of wrap up our conversation is to be very explicit about this. How does the gospel make sense of the meaning crisis and then heal it,
mm,
right? And we've already pointed that. I mean, I think the key is, like we said, is in John 1, where it's this declaration of this is who Jesus is. And at the beginning, John is telling us, and this is what I'm about to tell you now what he did, what he accomplished. And then there's the sense of his commandments, his expectations, and so forth. I mean, that's the basic model of the gospel, right? Who is the conqueror? What did he do? What does he expect of everyone? And these things are true about the gospel of Jesus. So how does the gospel make sense of this meaning crisis? And how does it especially help to heal it? We've already started talking about the first question about making sense of it, but how does it
mm,
help to heal it? Like when someone accepts the gospel and begins to live in faithfulness to it, like what does that do to someone?
I mean, it gives, first of all, it gives the right purpose, hopefully, to that person. And then it also, if you live the way that the gospel, I mean, there's a practical aspect to it, which is that if you live in the manner that the gospel tells you to live, you will be free. Like you will
Mm,
actually be free from, you become free from the little principalities that rule over you, whether it's your own passions, whether it's addictions, whether it's ideologies, and you will live in a life of love for others. I mean, that's, and but I think the freedom is the maybe the best way to understand it is that, the like I said, the problem is that there is always meaning. The meaning crisis, even though people think they're nihilistic, what they end up being is slaves of little gods. And what the gospel offers is a way to not be a slave to other gods and to be a
mm,
slave to the origin of all things, which means to be free from all these little passions and these little things. And that is a real thing that we see happen in the lives of the saints. So it's not just a theory, and there are living saints now today. There people who come close to it that shine brightly for us because we can see in their eyes and in their actions and in their whole being, a kind of abandonment of all these little things that we are often slaves to. And so it is, I mean, it really is the healing of the diseases that the meaning crisis
yeah.
brings. It's not just a mental thing.
No, yeah, it's funny. Like you in Canada, me in the United States, we live in one of the most unlimited societies that the world has ever seen in terms of like the things that you and I can simply just do
Yeah.
because we want to. And yet, how often do people say, I feel trapped?
Yeah.
Like that's amazing that we have all of this power and yet we feel trapped because what it means to be human is to be limited. So pick your limit.
Yeah.
I mean, that right? Like something's going to limit you. The fact that, and it's funny, like what is, I mean, we've mentioned transgenderism a few times. I think it's very apt because what is transgenderism? It's an attempt to exceed even the limit of this corporeal form. Like this shouldn't even limit me.
Yeah.
I can think some other thing, and I become that. I can transubstantiate myself by saying no longer this is my body,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't know what the words of institution of transgenderism are. But uh, you're going to be limited by something, and so will you be limited by the numerous little gods of, mammon, of desire, of sex, of whatever, or will you be limited by the limitless one himself who made you,
Yeah.
who formed you out of dust and made you into something, you know? Yeah, I think yeah, freedom, I think, is such an important word. And it's interesting, like the freest people that we know are monks and
Monks.
nuns
That's right.
who live the most limited life that you can live, from a human point of view. And yet that has set them free in a way that it's hard to grasp.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for most people, they can at some point understand that, in fact, to limit yourselves in the proximal is to free yourself for higher things. And that's just like, it's very practical, right? In
Yeah.
the sense that it's like, if you, how can I say this? Like, if you can do anything, like you, at some point you reach paralysis. It's actually like for most people, it's scrolling Netflix, right? It's like you go on
Mm,
Netflix and you're like, oh, I want to watch something. And then it's like there's a million things and you just like you're lost in a sea of possibility, and then it's actually a kind of it's a, how can I say this, it's a kind of suffering because you have too much possibility, and that's true
yeah.
for anything. You have to at some point limit yourself in order to be able to be free for higher purposes. But
Yeah.
that's true, like very, very true. Like it's true in ways that like monks know to be true.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know if you were ever into comic books,
Yes.
but I was into Marvel comics. I was never into DC comics. I don't know why. But I was into Marvel Comics, and I remember the 1980s. There were these limited run series called Secret Wars. Do you
Yeah,
remember that?
yeah,
And so there was this figure called the Beyonder, and the Beyonder was this. He was essentially an all-powerful being, right? And yet he experienced this existential angst. He could do anything and yet kind
yeah.
of didn't know what to do with himself. And so what he did then is he took all the superheroes and supervillains that he could find in our universe and brought them to this planet that he created and made them battle it out in an attempt to kind of find meaning for himself, right? And so that's what Secret Wars were. It wasn't happening on Earth. It was this game that he had set up, and there was Secret Wars 1 and there was Secret Wars 2, but the constant was that the Beyonder like never knew
He was
what
bored.
it all meant,
Yeah, he had too
And
much possibility.
I remember in Secret Wars 2, the end of it was he attempted to create. I mean, this is really how the story goes. You can see how this all just plays out again and again. He created a body for himself and he was going to become human,
Mm.
right? I mean, you could see why, right, where there that goes.
Craving for limit, craving for.
Exactly. And so he's sort of trying to incarnate himself. And then what happens is that like it's like he's doing this through lab equipment, sort of this almost limitless being setting up a lab. How very modern is that, right? And so he's in this big vat and bubbling liquids and whatever, whatever, whatever. And then the superheroes come in and it explodes. And they're like, where is he? And they see that the body that he's created is dead. And then I can't remember, it was some other figure. Maybe it was one of the Watchers.
Hmm.
I love the fact that there's Watchers in Marvel Comics. Says, well, actually, what happened to him is he became a universe.
Okay.
So he turns into this other reality effectively. And it's interesting as I mean, again, this was 40 years ago in comics, but it's interesting how that plays out, right? It's an attempt to kind of tell the story of Jesus in some weird way, although this is not God, the true God. This is some sort of lesser God. Because like I said, he's got existential
Yeah,
anxiety.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and how that's sort of playing out now, where people are trying to create bodies for themselves. And now I think that Marvel Comics got the solution wrong, right? It's not become a universe, because you can't become a universe. That's not a thing that we can do. And I'm not the Beyonder. Um, but it's really about becoming truly, fully human, to be conformed to the image of the one who is God and man at the same time. And that works in a mythic way that is hard to kind of work out logically, although you can explain the story, right? Which we've done a little bit of. And yet the only way to really know it deep within, in your bones is this participation in the life of Christ that is the life in the church. And I
Hmm.
think that this is why I think de-ritualized Christianity is setting our own house on fire,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the push towards it. Like, let's make it more understandable for people. Like, it was never meant to be understood. That's not what ritual is for. It's meant to,
Yeah,
to change you,
yeah.
like, let's subject it all just to our intellect. How big is your brain anyway? It can only hold so much. Um, so yeah, I think, yeah, that sense of healing, because and healing is not just fixing wounds, it's also like um taking the container off so that there can be growth. Like, if you plant a tree and then put a trash can over it, it can't do anything. You got to take that thing off so that it can go upwards, and
Hmm.
um yeah. Okay, so here's my final question then. Like, as we're um trying to live the gospel and to speak the gospel in a way that maybe that is not the cliches, right? That is has all the sharpness and the weirdness that it had in the first century, because it was a deeply weird thing. I mean, people said these guys are drunk. People said you're trying to turn our society upside down. Like, it was deeply weird when people heard it.
Hmm.
What is, for those of us who are trying to articulate this, like, what is kind of the way forward to, like, if someone says, no, like, no one's going to come to my door and say, I'm sorry, Father, I've been experiencing the meaning crisis. what can you do to help? But that's not what anyone says. It's more like, I don't know where my life is going. Or I don't, like what is the immediate response so that it doesn't come across as some kind of pitch,
Yeah.
like that's one of my big concerns is like, I'm not trying to sell anything,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, I mean, I can just speak for the way that I've been talking about it is I find the Christian tradition to be absolutely beautiful and powerful and exciting.
Hmm.
And I think that there are constant surprises as you dive deeper into it. And so I think that what I've been trying to do is basically take people along with my own surprises. It's like, but if I see this powerful vision of how how Christ is recapitulating the story of Joseph, and it's just this beautiful thing. And I'm like, wow, this is so amazing. But then also the same with the hymnography, the same with the iconography. Uh, that's at least when I talk about it, that's been my approach is to say, look at how powerfully beautiful this is. And in some ways, yes, look how it contrasts to the suburbs. Like look how it contrasts to, this kind of dry, boring world and the kind of the people searching for excess, you could say, right? So there's this weird mix in the modern world. So look how it contrasts to it. That's been the way that I've been approaching it. And some people, at least there's some people that are definitely reacting to that and saying, hey, I can. It's also because people have been thinking that this is all stupid for a very long time. So we're actually in a very good place because for helping people understand, for example, what you were talking about now, just simple realizing that your life is full of rituals. You can't actually get away from rituals, whether it's brushing your teeth, or a family meal or whatever. All these things you do are all ritualized. There's no fully improvised, completely spontaneous world. That's nonsense. Grammar is a ritual. I don't know what to tell you. So like getting people to see that and then to understand that there are rituals that are more powerful and more encompassing than others. And if you participate them, they will yield the fruits, that brushing your teeth will yield the fruit of you having your teeth brushed. But then worshiping God in the proper way, in ways that elevate all of creation into worship, that will also do something, and that it's a real transformation. And I
Yeah.
think people can understand it today. I think it's something that maybe a few decades ago, most people would think, oh, it's all superstitious, it's all this nonsense. But I think now we're in a time where people can actually perceive it and understand it.
Yeah. I I think that there's an opportunity to lean into the weirdness.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That in this age where every story is being told all at once and all stories are being attacked, like let's
Well,
just
in a
tell it.
world where we're about to have AI gods, it's okay to lean into the weirdness
Right.
because the world is about to get really weird. Like we're gonna see hybrid animal, human. Like we're gonna see all kinds of insane stuff, folks. We're gonna see cyborgs. We're gonna see all that stuff. So if you think that the world's just gonna continue to be this boring, regular stuff, think again. The world
Yeah.
is actually becoming strange, and the strangeness of the Christian story is the right strange.
Yeah. I think that a lot of Christians have for a long time now been trying to put together the pieces of a broken Christendom. Right? Like no, come on, let's get these blocks back on the wall. We can rebuild this, like we can put this thing back together. We can have what we once had. Never mind that what we once had a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah.
It did a lot of dark things. Um, I think we need to stop thinking in terms of post-Christianity. I
Hmm.
think we need to think in terms of pre-Christianity.
Hmm.
That this age is now and will become more like the time of the apostles,
Yeah.
where there's a lot of different gods doing a lot of different things. And it's going to be very apparent as time goes by that most of what they're doing is bad. And we're going to have one God that we can say, this one sacrificed himself for you. And because none of the rest are going to do that.
No, they just want to eat you.
That's right. I
They
mean,
just want to make you, they just want to make you like yeah, there.
yeah, anyone who says that Jesus is just like the pagan gods has never read pagan stories. They might have seen, Disney's Hercules or whatever, where like Zeus is a good father.
Yeah.
Like that's not Zeus,
Yeah.
where
Where it's actually Hercules actually killed his own children and then had an apotheosis and then became a god.
right. Right, exactly. Like no, if you actually read the stories of the other gods,
Yeah.
then you will see who they are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's going on now. So even though the new gods that are arising, however you want to consider that, whether it's just ideas or societal movements or spiritual beings taking on other names, um, all you have to do is compare, frankly, and you just see what the Bible says over and over again. Who among the gods is like unto thou, O Lord?
Hmm.
He's the one. He's different from all the rest, completely different. He doesn't take a bribe. He's not partial, and he loves us, which the other gods do not. They don't love us.
They don't love you. That's
So
awesome.
yeah, yeah. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with me today. It's been a joy, really.
Yeah, it's great. And I wish you all the best with this new venture of the of coming in on YouTube with some of us and entering into the fray. I think it's wonderful and I can't wait to see what you do with the channel.
Thank God. Well, Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
All right. Thank you.